Should I be looking at this camera or does it
You
not
can
matter?
look in like his direction, there, doesn't really matter. Whatever you feel.
Okay. This is so funny.
You want to stretch your arms out?
Yeah, sure. Marco Nocito, he and Miz.
But could you talk a little bit about where you grew up?
Yeah, so I'm from New York City. I grew up in Manhattan. I went to a private school, and it's considered like a like an Ivy prep school. It's pretty homogeneously white, with like a few exceptions. And there were a few East Asian people, but there were like zero mixed people. That informed a lot of my experience. So I'm half Chinese. My mom's Chinese, and my dad's Italian. So my name is like Marco Nocito. It's like an Italian name. I grew up feeling very, very Chinese. I speak Chinese okay. My aunt lived with us. My mom's side has always lived with us growing up, and so I kind of had the experience of these two Chinese women, plus my dad really raising me. And we always had Chinese food at the house. I'd always get like hongbao like during Chinese New Year. And so I grew up like having all these very Chinese experiences and not really having an outlet for it in high school and middle school. I didn't really have any Asian friends, but I didn't really have any East Asian friends. And so being mixed, being part of my identity was something I didn't really think about except in like the aspect of feeling different than a lot of people that I went to high school with. And when I went to college, that kind of really shifted. German House was maybe like 30-40% Chinese when I moved in. And that was like crazy for me, right? Because I'd never been around that many people who were, a race that I identified with stronger than I did, the other side of me. So it felt like, I've been deprived of being around Chinese people for so long that I just want to like experience as many friendships as I can with people that are Chinese. I think I'm like on the border of white passing. Some people tell me that, right? Like I'll speak Chinese at restaurants and the waiters will be like, who the fuck is this kid? Like, what is he doing? And so like that even more reinforces this feeling of that like, oh, like I kind of need to build connections to Chinese people in like my inner life, because often like the outside world doesn't accept me as that.
Could you talk about generally how your cultural background has sort of affected your view of romantic relationships?
Probably a little bit by proxy, right? In the sense of like, I think I've ended up spending a lot of time around Chinese people. But for example, my current girlfriend has ended up being Chinese just like by virtue of like me spending a lot of time with people who are East Asian. Romantically, I still think it does really matter to me that someone who I date shares some sort of cultural background with me, just because it's something I really care about. Especially my last girlfriend in high school. She was really excited to be a part of this side of me, this side of my culture, and who I was. But also it kind of felt like exploratory and kind of like a exhibitory way, if that made sense. Like I think she thought it was like really fun, like I was really cool, but I don't know how seriously she took it. I haven't experienced any kind of really like blatant fetishization. I think partially because of the way that I present, but it's definitely under the surface a lot. I had a Tinder profile for a while before I deleted it, and people put their flags in their bio. And so like I'd put like my two flags, I'd put Chinese and Italian in my bio, and sometimes people would comment on it. And the comments were interesting. They range from like, oh, like being mixed is so cool, or like, oh, like I'm really attracted to mixed people. That one's weird. Yeah, that one's weird. To just like, especially if I matched with other mixed people, they would talk to me about their experience. There's a reason people put their flags in their bio, especially if they like consider themselves like exotic or whatever. And so I ended up taking it out because I was like, this is I'm fetishizing myself by doing this. But I guess I was kind of asking for it by presenting myself in that way. If people are white and Asian and they're dating each other, I think this can certainly be valid, right? Of course, even like if they're hooking up, this can certainly be valid, right? Like I just think there needs to be a bit of like a effort on both people's parts, or especially the white person's part, to kind of be like understanding and like recognize like where, like even subconsciously, like where do my influences come from and who am I attracted to, things like that. I have a friend who's white who has a Korean girlfriend. I mean, when he goes to see a movie recently, and he was like, oh, I'm bringing along my girlfriend, and I was like, yeah, I'll bring mine along too. I felt weird, right? The white side of me came out, and it was just like, oh, like we're just two like white dudes sitting with our Asian girlfriends at the movie. I was like, oh, this is fucking weird. Yeah, that felt whack.
Could you talk a little bit more about why you find like race and culture really important factors in your relationship?
Like in my fraternity, this is not related to dating, right? But there's a guy who's half black and half white. We relate a lot just based on the fact of being mixed and not feeling like you belong. And so that has always like been like a conversation starter and also like a place of connection that I think is really important. You know, as well as, you know, me feeling Chinese, I also feel like I'm being bridged between that gap. I went to see Shang-Chi with some of my friends, and one of them, who was like full Chinese, was like, you know, like, you don't know how much this means to me, like seeing people who are representative of my race, and he's like my best friend, and I was like, I'm Chinese, you know, like I guess I understand how you feel, especially how I present, but it's like that kind of sucked inherently, right? Like I think it is hard for, you know, like fully Chinese communities to accept me just because I'm half. You know, my mom's side of family is from China, and like that is, you know, it just is, you know, it filters through every aspect of your life. So, you know, I'm really lucky to be dating someone who is very much authentically yourself without question, especially when it comes to your race, and also respects me as someone who is kind of a rightful member of that culture. You know, she you know, one thing she mentioned to me one night is that like I'm really surprised that like your Chinese is comprehensible, and she didn't mean that in an insulting way at all. She's just like, you know, very often like people who are half like don't involve themselves so much in that culture, and my response to her was like, you know, I didn't really have a choice. It just is who I am, even if I don't look that way.